Okay, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at ancient Egypt and then the people that conquered them. So what we're talking about is we're going to talk about the geography and a little bit of ancient Egypt first. But what we need to look at is you're going to start seeing a pattern in all of these ancient river civilizations that we talked about because they all developed around a river. A river is a main element of life, and you need it to survive. And these people used it, um, just much like the Sumerians, Mesopotamians, for farming. The Nile would flood twice a year, and once it would flood, it would leave a lot of silt, just like in Mesopotamia. But some facts that we need to remember about the Nile River: it's the longest river in the world. It's over 4,000 miles long. The Amazon is the widest river in the world, and that's in South America. There, going through Brazil. But the Nile is the longest in the world, and it runs a little bit different. We'll look at that at a map in just a little bit. But in ancient Egypt, it had two regions. It divided Egypt into the upper and lower parts of, excuse me, the upper and lower parts of Egypt. It also was very hard to navigate, and it allowed it to be a natural barrier where invaders could not sail down because they had what were called cataracts. Cataracts, you may have heard that term. When people get old like me, you get your eyes and your eyesight gets cloudy, and that's because a cataract develops in your eye. That is not what we're talking about here. A cataract here is actually a waterfall that makes it very hard for the invaders to navigate down the river. It also, at the bottom or at the end, divides into several different branches, and that silt and that dirt and mud all develop into what's called a delta, which is we talked about. We have one at the end of the Mississippi River, and we talked about that when we did our geography unit. Um, Very little rainfall in Egypt, just like Mesopotamia. We know that Egypt's in the middle of a desert, the Sahara Desert, and the flooding allowed them to farm. If the Nile River didn't flood, they couldn't farm. It provided them water for their animals, fertile soil for farming. Their location, sorry, if we look at their location, let's look at this map real quick. So this is a little bit different in the fact that the Nile River starts here and it runs south to north, which is different than most rivers in the world. If we were looking at the Mississippi River would run north to south. So when this cuts this country in two, the part in the north in Egypt is called Lower Egypt. The part in the south is called Upper Egypt. It's the exact opposite of how the United States would be. If we were running the river, looking at the Mississippi River, the states in the northern part, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, top part of Illinois, that's the northern part or the upper part of the United States. And then you look at Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, those states are the southern or lower part of the United States. It's the exact opposite in Egypt because the Nile River runs the exact opposite way. So all these places like Kush and Nubia are in Upper Egypt, whereas Memphis, Thebes, places like that are at near the mouth of the Nile River. Remember, mouth is where it ends, source is where it starts. Those near the mouth are in the lower part, even though it's in the north. But that's because the river runs south to north. If we go back in, there's a couple important people that we need to look at in this section. Looking here, remember they built canals to carry food. the Nile allowed farmers to raise animals because they could give them something to drink. They also gave many types of fish to eat, and they could get ducks and geese for food as well. What is important here is the natural barriers. And then we'll go back to that map in a second, and I'll go through these three natural barriers. But I want you to know the people here. Menes rose to power in Upper Egypt, which meant he was from the southern part, and he helped take over the lower part of Egypt by marrying a princess from there. And he combined the two, and he became the first unified ruler of Egypt, called a pharaoh. He also was the first one, like Sargon in Mesopotamia, to come up with the first dynasty for the Egyptians. Remember, a dynasty is a series of rulers from the same family. The first dynasty lasted for about 200 years, and it extended Egypt's territory south. Now, if we look back at this map again, we can see that the western desert, the Sahara Desert, was right here, and the eastern desert was right here, which made it very tough for soldiers in full metal armor to walk across this desert and attack or attack Egypt. As going down the Nile, you can see all these little red slashes, and that's where cataracts are. So it would be very hard to go down the river and then try to navigate all those cataracts to attack. And then you had the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea that also made it hard to cross to get over into Egypt. So that's looking at ancient Egypt, who unified it. And we're going to look at some other things here in just a second, called the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the Egyptian achievements.